Hello everyone and welcome back to Shadow Man Stories. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now, let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Tom Crowfeather, and I've been a park ranger at Red River Gorge for 12 years now. People always ask about the name. Yeah, I'm part Cherokee, fourth generation on my grandmother's side. She used to tell me stories about the old days, back when my people knew every cave and cliff face in these Kentucky mountains. I never paid much attention then. Wish I had. The call came in on a Tuesday morning in October. Missing climbers, which wasn't unusual. We get maybe 30 or 40 rescue calls a year in the gorge. What made this one different was where they'd gone missing. Devil's Gulch, a narrow canyon system that most climbers avoid. The rock there is weird, all pocketed and brittle in places. Plus, it's got this strange echo effect that makes voices bounce around in ways that mess with your head. Two climbers, Jake Limestone and his girlfriend Sarah Chen, dispatch told me over the radio. Been missing since Sunday. Their car is still at the trailhead. I knew Jake. Good climber, been coming to the gorge for years. He wasn't the type to take stupid risks or get lost. Sarah was newer to climbing, but Jake was careful about who he took on hard routes. Something felt wrong already. I drove out to Devil's Gulch with my rescue gear, ropes, anchors, medical kit, the works. The October air was crisp, leaves just starting to turn. Beautiful morning, but there was something in the air that made the back of my neck itch. Animals were quiet. No bird songs, no squirrels chattering. In 12 years of working these mountains, I'd learned to pay attention when the wildlife goes silent. The trailhead was empty except for Jake's beat-up Honda. I checked inside, climbing shoes on the back seat, energy bar wrappers, nothing unusual. Their approach would have taken them up the main trail for about 2 miles, then branching off toward the cliff faces. I started hiking, following them, a worn path through oak and maple trees. The forest felt too quiet. Even my footsteps seemed muffled. About halfway to the cliffs, I found the first sign something was wrong. Claw marks. They were carved deep into the bark of an old oak tree, about 8 feet off the ground. 4 parallel gouges, each one as thick as my thumb. Too big for a bear, wrong shape for a mountain lion. Whatever made them had serious claws and could reach higher than anything that lived in these mountains. I took photos with my phone, measured the marks, 8.5 feet from the ground to the bottom scratch. I've seen bear sign my whole life. This wasn't bear sign. The trail got steeper as I approached the gulch. The walls rose up on both sides, solid sandstone carved by water over millions of years. This was where the echo effect started. Every sound bounced and multiplied until you couldn't tell where anything was coming from. "Jake! Sarah!" I called out. My voice came back from 6 different directions, layered and strange. Then I heard something else mixed in with the echoes. Another voice, higher pitched, almost like Sarah's voice, calling back, "Help us!" I stopped cold. The echo of my own voice had faded, but that other voice kept going, bouncing off the rock walls. "Help us! We're trapped!" "Where are you?" I shouted. This time the response came from above me, somewhere up on the cliff face. "Down here, in the cave!" That didn't make sense. The voice said, "Down here," but it was coming from up above. I tilted my head back, scanning the rock wall. Devil's Gulch was maybe 200 feet deep at this point, with overhanging walls that would challenge expert climbers. There were some cave openings visible, dark holes in the sandstone, but they were 60 or 70 feet up. I got out my binoculars and glassed the cliff face. The rock was smooth, polished by wind and water. No way to climb it without technical gear. But as I watched, I saw movement in one of the cave mouths. Just a flash, like someone pulling back into the darkness. "I can see you," I called. "Stay! There, I'm coming up." But as I lowered my binoculars, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. There were scratch marks on the rock face. Not tool marks from climbing gear, not natural erosion patterns. Claw marks like the ones on the tree, carved right into the sandstone. They made a path up the cliff, Impossible gouges that led from the bottom of the gulch right to that cave entrance. Nothing could make marks like that in solid stone, and nothing could climb a sheer overhang without leaving tool marks or rope scars. But something had climbed this wall, something with claws that could cut sandstone like butter. I set up my climbing gear at the base of the cliff, hands shaking just a little as I checked my harness and rope. In 12 years of rescue work, I'd never seen anything that scared me like those claw marks. But Jake and Sarah were up there somewhere, and it was my job to get them down. As I started climbing, using every hold and technique I'd learned over the years, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. The cave mouth above was just a black hole, but I felt eyes on me, and somewhere in the echo-twisted acoustics of Devil's Gulch, I could swear I heard breathing that wasn't mine. The climb took me 40 minutes, every movement careful and deliberate. The sandstone was solid under my hands, but those claw marks were everywhere once I got close enough to see them clearly. They cut through the rock like it was clay, deep gouges that would have taken a jackhammer to make. My grandmother's voice echoed in my head, old stories about things that could walk on stone like it was flat ground. I reached the cave entrance just as the sun disappeared behind clouds. The opening was about 6 feet wide, tall enough for a person to walk upright. The smell hit me immediately, something sour and wild, like an animal den, but worse, sharper. I clicked on my headlamp and called into the darkness. "Jake? Sarah? It's Tom Crowfeather, Park Service. I'm here to help." My voice disappeared into the cave without an echo. That was wrong. Everything echoed in Devil's Gulch, but this cave seemed to swallow sound. I unclipped my rope and tied it off to a solid anchor point, then started into the tunnel. The cave went back about 30 feet before opening into a larger chamber. My light swept across the walls, revealing more of those impossible claw marks. They covered every surface, some old and weathered, others fresh and sharp. In the center of the chamber, I found Jake's climbing gear, his harness, helmet, and a coil of rope. No sign of Jake or Sarah. But there was something else. Skin. Not human skin. This was thick, scaly, like a snake that had shed its entire hide. But it was huge, easily 8 feet long, and shaped wrong. The head part was too big, with holes where eyes should be, and the torso section looked almost human except for the texture. I took photos, my hands steady despite the fear creeping up my spine. "Jake!" I called again, louder. This time, I got an answer. But it came from behind me, back toward the cave entrance. "Tom, is that you?" Jake's voice. But something was off about it. Too calm, like he was sitting in his living room instead of lost in a cave. I turned toward the sound, my headlamp beam cutting through the darkness. "Yeah, it's me. Where are you? Are you hurt?" "I'm right here, man. Can't you see me?" The voice was coming from the tunnel entrance, but my light showed nothing but empty stone. I started toward the sound, stepping carefully around the pile of shed skin. "Keep talking so I can find you," I said. "I'm right here, right behind you." I spun around. My light hit empty air, but the voice had definitely come from behind me. My heart was hammering now. In the silence that followed, I heard something else, a sound like scales dragging across stone. That's when I saw the eyes. They were about 7 feet off the ground, reflecting my headlamp beam like an animal's eyes at night. But they were in the wrong place, floating in the air near the cave ceiling where nothing should be. As I watched, they moved, tracking me as I shifted my position. "Jake?" I whispered. "Right here, Tom," the voice said, but now it was coming from where the eyes were, up near the ceiling. "Don't you recognize me?" The eyes blinked, and for just a second, my light caught something else. A shape that might have been human pressed against the cave ceiling like it was crawling on the roof. But humans can't stick to stone ceilings, and humans don't have eyes that glow. I backed toward the cave entrance, hand on my radio. "Jake, I need you to come down here where I can see you properly. Are you injured? Where's Sarah?" "Sarah's here too," the voice said. But now it sounded different. Higher pitched. like Sarah's voice mixed with Jake's, both speaking at the same time. "We're both right here." The eyes moved, flowing across the ceiling like water. As they got closer to my light, I could see more details. The shape wasn't human, not entirely. Too long, too flexible. It moved like a snake, but it had arms and legs and a face that looked almost right in the darkness. "You need to come down now," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm trained in medical aid. Let me help you." "We don't need help," Sarah's voice said from the ceiling. "We like it up here. You should come up with us." That's when I ran. I sprinted for the cave entrance, my headlamp beam bouncing wildly. Behind me, I heard something drop from the ceiling with a wet thud, then the sound of claws on stone getting closer. I reached the entrance and grabbed my rope, rappelling down the cliff face faster than I'd ever descended before. Halfway down, I looked up. Something was watching me from the cave mouth, silhouetted against the darker interior. It had Jake's general shape, but it was wrong. Too tall, too thin, arms too long, and it was hanging upside down from the cave ceiling like a bat. I hit the ground hard, stumbling and rolling. By the time I looked up again, the cave entrance was empty. But I could hear voices echoing through the gulch, Jake's voice, Sarah's voice, both calling for help from impossible directions. I grabbed my gear and ran for the trail, branches whipping at my face in the fading daylight. Behind me, something howled, a sound that wasn't quite human and wasn't quite animal. It echoed off the cliff walls, multiplied and distorted until it seemed like a whole pack of things were chasing me. I didn't stop running until I reached my truck. Even then, as I fumbled with the keys, I could hear voices in the forest. Jake calling my name, Sarah crying for help. But I'd seen what was making those sounds, and it wasn't Jake or Sarah anymore. I drove back to the ranger station with my hands shaking on the steering wheel. Whatever was in that cave, it had taken my friends and left something else wearing their voices, something that could climb on ceilings and shed its skin like a snake. And it knew my name. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those glowing eyes staring down from the cave ceiling. I'd filed my report with the sheriff's department, but I kept the details vague. Missing climbers, evidence of wildlife activity, need for technical rescue team. How do you explain to someone that their missing persons case involves something that sheds 8-foot snakeskins and crawls on cave ceilings? By morning, I'd made a decision. I called my grandmother. Agnes Crowfeather lived in a small house on the Cherokee Reservation, about 2 hours south of the gorge. She was 83 and still sharp as a knife. When I was little, she'd told me stories about the old days, not the pleasant tourist version, but the real stories about things that lived in the mountains before white settlers arrived. "Grandmother," I said when she answered the phone, "I need to ask you about the old stories, about things that could change their shape." There was a long pause. When she spoke again, her voice was different, more serious. "Where are you, Tommy?" "Red River Gorge, Devil's Gulch specifically." Another pause. "That place has been trouble for a long time. Your great-great-grandfather helped bind something there in 1863. What did you see?" I told her everything. The claw marks, the shed skin, the thing on the cave ceiling that spoke with my friends' voices. She listened without interruption. "Skinwalker," she said finally. "But not the kind from desert tribes. This is something older. Cherokee called them raven mockers, spirits that steal the shape and voice of people they kill. Your ancestor bound one in those caves during the war." "Bound it how?" "Ritual. Stones arranged in the old pattern, words of power spoken in the old language. But bindings weaken over time, especially when people forget the old ways. Has there been blasting in that area? Mining? Construction?" I thought about it. "There's been some quarry work on the other side of the ridge, road construction too. That would do it. The binding is failing, and the raven mocker is getting stronger. It will take more people now, learning their shapes, their voices. Eventually, it will be strong enough to leave the gulch. How do I stop it? You can't, not alone. But you can strengthen the binding, hold it until help comes. I'll need to call Robert Nighthawk. He knows the old ceremonies." After I hung up, I sat in my truck outside the ranger station, thinking. Two more climbers had gone missing overnight, a couple from Ohio who'd been camping near the gulch. Their tent was found empty, sleeping bags still warm. Whatever was in those caves was getting bolder. I drove back to Devil's Gulch with a different kind of gear this time. Along with my climbing equipment, I had my service pistol, extra ammunition, and a high-powered flashlight. My grandma. Other had told me bullets wouldn't kill a raven mocker, but they might slow it down. The forest was even quieter than before. No insects, no birds, no wind in the trees. The silence felt heavy, like the air before a thunderstorm. As I approached the cliff face, I saw new claw marks on trees, fresh gouges that seemed to track my movement from the trail to the base of the cliff. But this time, I wasn't going up. This time, I was going deeper. My grandmother had mentioned caves at ground level, hidden entrances that connected to the chamber system above. If the raven mocker was collecting people, it would need somewhere to keep them, somewhere dark and secure. I found the entrance about 50 yards downstream from the main cliff face. It was partially hidden by fallen rocks and thick brush, but the smell gave it away. That same sour, wild scent I'd detected in the upper cave. The opening was narrow, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. I tied off my rope and started into the tunnel, moving slowly with my flashlight in one hand and pistol in the other. The passage sloped downward, winding deeper into the mountain. More claw marks covered the walls, some so deep they'd gone through solid rock to reveal hollow spaces behind. After about 100 feet, the tunnel opened into a large chamber. My light swept across a scene that made my stomach turn. Bodies. At least 6 people, arranged in a rough circle around the chamber walls. But they weren't dead. They were breathing, eyes closed, like they were sleeping. Jake was there, and Sarah, and 2 others I didn't recognize. The missing Ohio couple were propped against the far wall, still in their camping clothes. But they all looked wrong. Deflated somehow, like something had been drained out of them. Their skin was pale and papery, and when I got closer I could see that parts of them were missing. Patches of skin and hair, like samples had been taken. In the center of the chamber was a pile of shed skins, dozens of them, all different sizes and shapes. Some looked human, others were clearly animal. The raven mocker had been collecting forms for a long time. "You came back!" The voice came from behind me. I spun around, gun raised, but there was nothing there except empty tunnel. "I knew you would," the voice continued. It was my own voice, speaking my own words back to me. Rangers always come back for their people. I backed toward the sleeping bodies, trying to keep my light and gun pointed in the same direction. Let them go. Take me instead. Laughter echoed through the chamber, but it wasn't coming from any single location. It seemed to bounce off every wall at once. "I already have you," my voice said. "I've been wearing your shape since yesterday. Your coworkers think you've been acting strange, but they don't know why." A chill ran down my spine. I thought about my report to the sheriff, my conversation with dispatch. Had I really made those calls, or had something else been using my voice? "The binding is failing," the voice continued, but now it sounded like my grandmother speaking. "Soon I'll be free to hunt wherever I choose. Your Cherokee ancestors were clever, but not clever enough." Something moved in the shadows at the edge of my light. A shape that might have been human, but the proportions were wrong. Too tall, arms too long, head tilted at an angle that should have broken its neck. "Show yourself," I said, finger tight on the trigger. "Which self would you like to see?" The thing stepped into my light, and I nearly dropped my gun. It was me. Perfect in every detail, wearing my ranger uniform, my equipment, even the small scar on my chin from a climbing accident years ago. But the eyes were wrong, yellow and reflective, like an animal's eyes. "I've been practicing," it said with my voice. "Soon I'll be good enough to walk among your people without anyone noticing. I'll be the perfect ranger, helpful and trusted, and I'll lead so many climbers to these caves." Behind it, more shapes moved in the darkness. Other versions of myself, other stolen forms, all watching with those yellow eyes. The raven mocker wasn't just one creature. It was a collective, a hive mind wearing dozens of stolen shapes. I fired 3 shots center mass. The bullets passed right through the false version of myself without effect. but the sound was deafening in the enclosed space. All the sleeping bodies jerked and moaned, starting to wake up. "Bullets can't hurt what isn't really there," my doppelganger said, "but noise can wake the collection. They're still alive, you know, still aware. They can see and hear everything I do with their stolen shapes." Jake's eyes opened, focusing on me with desperate clarity. His mouth moved, trying to speak, but no sound came out. The other bodies were stirring too, all of them staring at me with terrified awareness. "Now you understand," the creature said. "This is what will happen to everyone in your precious gorge. They'll sleep here while I wear their faces, learn their voices, meet their families. I'll be the perfect neighbor, the trusted friend, and I'll bring more people back to feed the collection." I had to get out, had to warn people. But as I backed toward the tunnel entrance, I realized the Raven Mocker was right about one thing. The binding was failing. I could feel it in the air, like static electricity building before a storm. Whatever my ancestors had done to contain this thing, it wouldn't hold much longer. And when it broke free, it would have an entire gorge full of climbers and campers to choose from. I ran through the tunnel like my life depended on it, because it did. Behind me, I could hear the Raven Mocker shifting and moving, taking new shapes, practicing voices. When I reached the surface, my truck was gone. In its place sat an identical vehicle, but with small differences. Wrong. License plate, different wear pattern on the tires. The thing had been copying everything down to the smallest details. My radio crackled. "Ranger Crowfeather, this is dispatch. We need you. At the visitor center, emergency situation." The voice sounded like Linda from dispatch, but I couldn't trust anything anymore. "What kind of emergency?" "Multiple missing persons. Looks like coordinated disappearances all around the gorge. Sheriff's Department is requesting all available personnel." I started walking toward the main road, staying off the trail. If the Raven Mocker could copy my truck, it could copy anything. My radio, my equipment, maybe even dispatch itself. I needed to get to my grandmother and Robert Nighthawk before this thing spread beyond the gulch. But I'd only gone about half a mile when I heard voices ahead on the trail. Familiar voices. "Tom? Tom, where are you?" It was Jake, sounding perfectly normal. Worried but alert, like he'd just gotten lost on a hike. "We got separated from our gear," Sarah's voice added. "Can you help us get back to the car?" I crept closer through the trees, staying hidden. Two figures were walking up the trail toward Devil's Gulch, Jake and Sarah looking exactly like themselves. Same clothes, same backpacks, same mannerisms. If I hadn't seen their unconscious bodies in that cave, I would have believed it was really them. "Tom!" Jake called again. "We know you're out here. We heard gunshots." The fake Sarah nodded. "We're not hurt, but we're confused. Something strange happened in the cave. We can't remember how we got out." I watched them through the trees, studying every detail. The Raven Mocker had perfected their forms, but it was still learning their personalities. Jake was too calm for someone who'd been missing for days. Sarah kept looking around with too much focus, like a predator scanning for prey. They split up, Jake continuing up the trail while Sarah circled around to flank my position. Military tactics. Neither Jake nor Sarah had military training. I keyed my radio, keeping the volume low. "This is Krars. Oh, Feather. I need to speak with Robert Nighthawk immediately. Emergency." Static answered me, then my own voice came through the radio. "No need for that, Tom. I'm handling the situation." The fake Crowfeather was already at the ranger station, talking to dispatch, coordinating the response. Soon there would be search teams throughout the gorge, all being led into carefully prepared traps. The Raven Mocker wasn't just hunting individual victims anymore. It was orchestrating a mass collection event. I turned off my radio and kept moving through the forest. My grandmother had said Robert Nighthawk knew the old ceremonies, but I needed to reach him before the creature realized what I was planning. A branch snapped behind me. I spun around to see Sarah emerging from behind a large oak tree, moving with unnatural silence. "Found you," she said, but her voice had changed. Deeper, more resonant. The thing was dropping its disguise. "You can't leave the gulch, Tom. You're part of the collection now. Her face began to shift, features flowing like water. Her skin took on that scaly texture I'd seen in the shed skins, and her eyes turned yellow. But she kept Sarah's general shape, her voice. "We know about your grandmother," she said. "We know about the old binding. It won't work this time." "Why not?" She smiled, showing too many teeth. "Because we've learned. We've had 160 years to study the ritual, to understand its weaknesses. Your ancestor bound one raven mocker, but we are many now. We've grown, multiplied, spread our essence through the cave system." More shapes emerged from the forest around me. The fake Jake, moving with that same predatory grace. 2 park rangers I recognized but knew couldn't be real. They were both on vacation this week. A family of campers, parents, and 2 kids, all with those yellow eyes. "The binding stones are still in place," the Sarathing Conti renewed. "But we've learned to work around them. Every person we take weakens the barrier a little more. Every shape we steal gives us more power to resist the old words." I was surrounded. Maybe a dozen false shapes closing in from all directions. But I noticed something important. They were all staying on the trails, avoiding certain areas between the trees. The binding might be weakened, but it wasn't completely broken. There were still places they couldn't go. I ran for a gap between 2 of the shapes, sprinting toward a cluster of stones I'd noticed earlier. They were arranged in a rough circle, worn smooth by weather but clearly placed by human hands. The raven mockers reached for me as I passed, but their hands stopped inches short of my body, like they'd hit an invisible wall. Inside the stone circle, I was safe. The creatures paced around the perimeter, snarling with voices that belonged to dead people. "You can't stay there forever," Fake Jake said. "And we have so many voices now. We can call for help using any form you trust." He was right. Soon the real search teams would arrive, and the raven mockers would be waiting for them with familiar faces and trusted voices. Unless I could find a way to strengthen the binding. I looked around the stone circle, studying the arrangement. 7 stones, each one carved with symbols that looked Cherokee but older somehow, more primitive. My grandmother had mentioned that the ritual required words of power in the old language, but I didn't know the words. That's when I heard a new voice calling through the forest. "Tommy, where are you, boy?" My grandmother's voice, but she was 2 hours away. I almost answered before I caught myself. The raven mockers were using every trick they had. "I know you can hear me," the fake grandmother called. "I'm here to help with the binding. Robert is with me." Another voice joined in, older and deeper. A man's voice speaking Cherokee, words I didn't understand but somehow felt in my bones. The creatures around the stone circle hissed and backed away slightly. "That's Robert. Nighthawk," Fake Jake said, his form beginning to waver. "He's trying to strengthen the binding, but it won't work. We're too strong now." But I could see the effect the Cherokee words were having. The false shapes were becoming less stable, their forms shifting between human and something reptilian. Whatever Robert was saying, it was working. I needed to add my voice to his, speak the words of power even if I didn't know them. My grandmother had always said the old language lived in the blood, that Cherokee descendants could feel the words even if they'd never learned them. I closed my eyes and let the sounds flow through me, ancient syllables that felt familiar, like a half-remembered song. The words came from somewhere deep inside, passed down through generations of genetic memory. The effect was immediate. The stone circle began to glow with soft light, and the raven mockers shrieked in unison, their stolen forms dissolving into shadow and smoke. But they weren't destroyed, just forced back, contained temporarily. "It won't last," the Sarathing hissed as it faded. "We know your weaknesses now. We know everyone you care about. When the binding fails again, we'll be ready." Then they were gone, melted back into the forest like morning mist. But I could still feel them watching, waiting. The binding was stronger now, but not permanent. And somewhere in those caves, 6 people were still trapped in the creature's collection, their bodies slowly being drained while it wore their stolen shapes. I had won the battle, but the war was far from over. The real rescue teams arrived 3 hours later, led by the actual Robert Nighthawk and my grandmother. Robert was a small, weathered man in his 70s, but he moved through the forest like someone much younger. He found me still sitting in the stone circle, afraid to leave the protection of the binding. "It's safe now, great," he said in accented English. "For a while." The next few hours were a blur of activity. We descended into the cave system with proper equipment and protective rituals. The 6 bodies were still there, unconscious but alive. Jake, Sarah, and the others were transported to the hospital in Lexington, listed as suffering from severe dehydration and exposure. They recovered physically, but something had been taken from them that couldn't be restored. Jake never climbed again. Sarah moved back to California and refused to talk about what happened in the caves. The Ohio couple sold their climbing gear and took up golf. I submitted my official report 3 days later. Equipment failure, exposure, possible carbon monoxide poisoning from a natural gas seepage in the caves. The claw marks were attributed to bear activity, the shed skins to local wildlife. Nobody questioned the story too hard. People prefer explanations that make sense in daylight. But I knew the truth, and so did Robert Nighthawk. "The binding will hold for another generation, maybe 2, he told me as we sat on my grandmother's porch a week later. But it's not a permanent solution. The raven mocker learns from every encounter. Next time it will be ready for our ceremonies. So what do? We watch. We remember. We pass down the old knowledge." He looked at me seriously. "Your ranger position puts you in the right place to monitor the situation. Are you willing to take on that responsibility?" I thought about Jake's hollow eyes in the hospital, about Sarah's trembling hands when she tried to describe what she couldn't remember, about all the climbers who would come to Devil's Gulch in the years ahead, drawn by its challenging roots and stunning beauty. "Yeah," I said, "I'm willing." That was 6 months ago. I'm still working as a park ranger at Red River Gorge, but my job description has expanded. I monitor the cave systems for unusual activity. I track missing persons cases more carefully, looking for patterns that don't fit normal explanations. And I've been learning Cherokee from my grandmother and mother, studying the old ceremonies that keep ancient evils contained. The binding stones are still in place, hidden among the regular rock formations that tourists photograph every day. Most people walk right past them without noticing. But I check them regularly, looking for signs of wear, listening for whispers and voices that belong to dead people. Devil's Gulch is still popular with climbers. The guidebooks list it as a challenging but manageable area, perfect for intermediate to advanced rock climbers. What they don't mention is the park ranger who watches from the trees, making sure nobody spends too much time near certain cave entrances. Sometimes, late at night when I'm doing paperwork at the ranger station, I hear voices on the wind. Jake calling for help, Sarah crying in the darkness, my own voice speaking words I never said. The raven mocker is still there, still learning, still growing stronger. But the binding holds, and I'm watching. For now, that's enough. Last week, I got a call about missing climbers in Daniel Boone National Forest, about 50 miles south of here. Same profile. Experienced climbers, disappeared from a remote cave system, equipment found but no bodies. I drove down to take a look. The cave mouth had fresh claw marks around it, and I found a shed skin about the size of a small person. But these markings were different, more sophisticated, like something had learned from the Devil's Gulch binding and was adapting its methods. I called Robert Nighthawk. "It's spreading," he said after I described what I'd found. The original binding contained one raven mocker, but the old stories talk about multiple entities. We may have just been dealing with the advanced scout. What do? We prepare, and we hope your generation is stronger than mine. I'm writing this account as a record, in case something happens to me. If you're reading this, and you work in any of the Appalachian cave systems, pay attention to the signs. Unusual claw marks, shed skins, voices calling from impossible locations. Animals going silent, fresh, scratches on trees too high for normal wildlife. And if you ever find yourself in Devil's Gulch, stay away from the caves. The climbs are challenging and the scenery is beautiful, but some places in these mountains are older than human memory. Some things were bound for good reasons, and those bindings are weakening every year. The Cherokee knew how to keep the old evils contained. I'm still learning. But I'm watching. And when the next call comes in about missing climbers, I'll be ready with more than just rescue equipment. Because the thing in Devil's Gulch taught me that some rescues require more than ropes and medical training. Some rescues require knowledge that's older than the mountains themselves. The Raven Mocker is patient, but it's not gone, and it's not alone. My name is Tom Crowfeather, and this is my warning. My name is Sarah Coleridge, and I've been a wildlife biologist for the National Park Service for 12 years. I have a PhD in animal behavior, and I thought I understood how nature worked. I was wrong about a lot of things. It started on a cold Tuesday morning in February when my supervisor handed me a folder thick with missing person reports. 3 college kids from Virginia Tech had vanished while cross-country skiing in the Monongahela National Forest. They were experienced winter athletes, not the kind who get lost easily. All 3 disappeared near Screaming Peak, my supervisor said. Local rangers want a wildlife expert to check if we're dealing with a predator situation. I knew Screaming Peak. It was a sharp mountain ridge about 20 miles east of my office, covered in old strip mines from the 1960s. The locals called it that because of weird sounds that echoed off the rock faces during winter storms. Most people figured it was just wind through the broken stone. Any animal sign found at the scene? I asked, flipping through the photos. Clean campsites, no blood, no torn fabric, just 3 empty sleeping bags and a camp stove still burning. That's the strange part, he said. Rangers found tracks, but they don't match anything in our identification guides. We need you to figure out what we're dealing with. I packed my gear that afternoon: camera equipment, plaster for making track casts, sample collection tools, and my portable DNA analysis kit. The drive to Screaming Peak took 2 hours through winding mountain roads. Snow started falling as I reached the trailhead. The ranger station sat empty except for one guy behind the desk. His name tag read Martinez. He looked tired, like he hadn't slept much. "You hear about the missing skiers?" he asked. "That's right. I'm Dr. Coleridge, wildlife biologist. Can you show me where they found the tracks?" Martinez grabbed his coat and led me outside. About 3 miles up the trail, but I should warn you, there's something weird about that whole area. Animals won't go near it. Haven't seen a deer track or bird dropping within half a mile of where those kids camped. That got my attention. In 12 years of field work, I'd never encountered a place that all wildlife avoided. Even after forest fires or chemical spills, some animals always stuck around. We hiked up the trail as snow continued falling. The forest felt normal at first. Pine trees, bare oak branches, the usual mountain landscape. But as we got closer to the peak, something changed. The silence grew heavier. No bird calls, no squirrel chatter, not even the sound of wind through branches. "Here," Martinez said, stopping at a small clearing. "This is where they made camp." The campsite looked exactly like the photos. 3 sleeping bags arranged around a dead fire pit, hiking gear neatly organized, no signs of struggle. But the tracks were something else entirely. I knelt down next to the clearest print and felt my stomach drop. The track was roughly humanoid, but wrong in every way that mattered. Too large, about 18 inches long and 8 inches wide. The toes were elongated with what looked like claw marks at the tips. The heel showed a strange, curved shape, almost like a partial hoof. "What do you think?" Martinez asked. "Bear?" I shook my head, taking photographs from every angle. "Bears don't leave tracks like this. Neither does anything else I've studied." I mixed up plaster and made several casts. These prints are deep, which means whatever made them weighs a lot. But the stride length suggests it walks upright most of the time. "Like Bigfoot?" Martinez tried to sound joking, but his voice carried real nervousness. "I don't believe in cryptids," I said. "There's always a logical explanation." But then as I said it, I wasn't sure I believed myself. We followed the track line away from the campsite. The prints led uphill toward the bare rock faces near the peak, then simply vanished at the edge of a large boulder field. Not faded away gradually like normal tracks do, just stopped, as if whatever made them had disappeared into thin air. The snow was falling harder now, and the temperature was dropping fast. Martinez kept looking over his shoulder like he expected something to follow us. "We should head back," he said. "Weather's getting bad, and this place feels wrong after dark." I wanted to argue, to set up my trail cameras and collect more samples, but something in the heavy silence made me nod. We packed up my equipment and hiked back down the mountain. That night in my hotel room, I uploaded the photos to my computer and started running comparisons against every animal database I had access to. Bears, wolves, mountain lions, even exotic species that might have escaped from private collections. Nothing matched. The DNA samples from hair caught on nearby branches came back even stranger. The genetic markers didn't fit any known species in the databases. Parts of the sequence looked almost human, but with significant variations that shouldn't exist in nature. I called my colleague Dr. James Ridgefield at the university. He specialized in primate evolution and had access to even more genetic databases than I did. "Sarah, these results don't make sense," he said after reviewing the data. "Some of these genetic markers predate modern humans by thousands of years, but others are completely unknown. Where exactly did you collect this sample?" "Monongahela National Forest, near Screaming Peak." Long pause. "I'm driving down tomorrow. This is too interesting to analyze from a distance." As I hung up the phone, I felt the first real chill of fear. In my scientific career, I'd always been able to explain the unexplainable. But this time was different. This time, all the evidence pointed toward something that shouldn't exist. Outside my hotel window, snow, continued to fall, and somewhere in the distance, I could swear I heard a sound like screaming carried on the wind. Dr. Ridgefield arrived the next morning with a truck full of equipment that looked more suited for a military operation than a research trip. Portable lab gear, high-powered cameras with night vision, and something that looked like a small radar unit. "If we're dealing with an unknown primate species, we need to document everything properly," he said, unloading cases from his truck. "This could be the discovery of the century." I wanted to share his excitement, but something about Screaming Peak had left me uneasy. The unnatural silence, the way Martinez kept looking over his shoulder, the complete absence of any wildlife sign. It felt more like a place animals were afraid of than just avoiding. We met Martinez at the ranger station. He looked even more tired than yesterday, with dark circles under his eyes. "Rough night?" I asked. "Weird sounds," he said. "Thought I heard screaming coming from up the mountain around 3 a.m. Probably just wind, but—" He shrugged, not finishing the thought. The three of us hiked back up to the campsite. In daylight, with fresh snow covering the ground, the area looked almost peaceful. But that heavy silence still pressed down on everything. "Remarkable," Ridgefield said, examining the plaster casts I'd made. "The bone structure implied by these tracks suggests a primate, but the size and proportions are all wrong for any known species." While he set up his equipment, I established a grid pattern to search for more evidence. Martinez stayed close, his hand resting on the radio attached to his belt. That's when we found the first body. It was hidden under a fallen tree about 50 yards from the original campsite. One of the missing skiers, a young woman named Jennifer Walsh according to her student ID, but the condition of the body made me step back and fight down nausea. Her winter clothing had been shredded, not cut or torn by normal means. The fabric showed claw marks consistent with the tracks we'd been following. But worse than the physical damage was her expression. Her face was frozen in a look of absolute terror, mouth open as if she'd been screaming when she died. "We need to call this in immediately," Martinez said, already reaching for his radio. "Wait," Ridgefield said, moving closer with his camera. "Let me document the scene first. This could provide crucial evidence about predator behavior." As he took photographs, I noticed something that made my scientific training war with a growing sense of dread. The body showed signs of being moved after death, but the drag marks in the snow didn't match the tracks we'd been following. They were deeper, wider, and showed a completely different gait pattern. "There's more than one of them," I said quietly. Ridgefield looked up from his camera. What? The drag marks don't match our original tracks. Different size, different movement pattern. We're not dealing with a single unknown animal. Martinez had gone pale. How many do you think? Before I could answer, a sound echoed across the mountainside that made all three of us freeze. It started low, almost below the range of human hearing, then rose to a wailing cry that seemed to come from the mountain itself. The sound was so loud and so wrong that it made my teeth ache and my vision blur slightly. Jesus, Martinez whispered. That's what I heard last night. The cry lasted nearly 30 seconds, rising and falling with an almost musical quality that no animal I knew could produce. When it finally stopped, the silence that followed felt even more oppressive than before. We're leaving, I said, right now. But the research, Ridgefield started. The research can wait until we have backup and proper equipment, I cut him off. Something killed that girl, and it's still out here. We packed up quickly, calling in the body location to the sheriff's apartment as we hiked down the mountain. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched the entire way back to the trailhead. That evening we met with Sheriff Davidson and a team from the county coroner's office. The recovery took most of the night, with teams of deputies hiking up and down the mountain with lights and body bags. Found the other two, Davidson told us around midnight, both showing similar trauma. Whatever did this is big, strong, and aggressive. Any theories on species? I asked. Davidson shrugged. State Wildlife Department is sending their own team tomorrow. But off the record? I've been working these mountains for 20 years, and I've never seen anything like this. The wounds, the sounds, the way the bodies were arranged. He shook his head. Doesn't feel natural. Back at the hotel, Ridgefield spread out photographs and measurements across 2 beds. His academic excitement had faded into something approaching obsession. Look at this, he said, pointing to close-ups of the claw marks. The spacing suggests opposable thumbs. And see here? The depth and angle indicate incredible strength, far beyond what any known primate could produce. James, 3 people are dead, I said. Maybe we should focus on public safety, rather than classification. But that's exactly why classification matters, he insisted. If we can understand what we're dealing with, we can predict behavior patterns, figure out territory ranges, develop safety protocols. I wanted to agree with him. Scientific analysis had always been my approach to wildlife management problems, but something about this situation felt different from normal predator encounters. The way the bodies had been arranged, almost displayed, the unnatural silence around the peak, the sound that had made my vision blur. I think we should contact the Cherokee Nation, I said, screaming. Peak is within their historical territory. They might have traditional knowledge about the area that could help. Ridgefield looked skeptical. Folklore isn't data. Right now, folklore might be all we have. That night, I lay awake, listening to the wind outside my hotel window and wondering what we'd gotten ourselves into. Every scientific instinct told me there had to be a rational explanation, but every survival instinct screamed that we were dealing with something far more dangerous than an unknown species of primate. Somewhere in the distance, barely audible through the hotel walls, I heard that horrible wailing cry again. And this time, it sounded closer. The Cherokee Nation's cultural liaison, Mary Tenkiller, arrived the next morning with a file folder and a concerned expression. She was an elderly woman with intelligent eyes and the kind of presence that made you listen when she spoke. Screaming Peak, she said, settling into a chair at the ranger station. My grandmother called it Where the Guardian Cries. It's been a dangerous place for generations. Guardian? Ridgefield asked. Mary opened her folder and pulled out photocopies of old documents. In the 1960s, Consolidated Mining Company strip-mined that entire ridge. They destroyed Cherokee burial grounds to get at the coal seams underneath. My grandfather filed complaints, but no one listened back then. I studied the old mining maps. The excavation sites matched exactly with the areas where wildlife avoided and where we'd found the tracks. What kind of guardian? I asked. The stories say that disturbing sacred burial sites can awaken protective spirits. They're not evil, But they're not human either. They exist to protect the dead from further desecration. Ridgefield looked skeptical. Ms. Tenkiller, we're trying to identify a biological species that's killed 3 people. Folklore isn't going to help with that. Mary's expression hardened. Young man, my people have lived in these mountains for thousands of years. We know the difference between folklore and survival information. Before the conversation could get more heated, Martinez's radio crackled to life. All units, we have another incident at Screaming Peak. Hunting party of 4 men overdue. Vehicles found abandoned at the North Trailhead. Sheriff Davidson's voice cut through the static. Dr. Coleridge, you and your team need to stay away from that mountain until we figure out what's happening. But I was already packing my equipment. Sheriff, with respect, you need wildlife expertise up there. This thing is escalating its behavior. Mary Tenkiller stood up. I'm coming with you. Ma'am, that's not safe, Martinez said. It's less safe to go up there without understanding what you're facing, she replied firmly. Against everyone's better judgment, our group of 4 hiked back up to Screaming Peak that afternoon. This time we brought radios, flare guns, and enough equipment to establish a temporary base camp below the danger zone. The hunting party's abandoned pickup trucks sat in the parking area with doors open and engines still running. Their gear was scattered around the vehicles. Rifles, ammunition, camping supplies, all left behind in obvious haste. They ran from something, I said, examining the scene. But what spooked 4 armed hunters badly enough to abandon thousands of dollars worth of equipment? We found the answer about half a mile up the trail. The tracks were everywhere now, not just the original humanoid prints, but several different types. Large and small, some showing partial human characteristics, others completely alien to anything in my experience. They covered the trail, the surrounding trees, even the rock faces in patterns that suggested climbing ability far beyond normal animals. Pack behavior, Ridgefield said, photographing the overlapping prints. We're definitely dealing with multiple individuals, probably family groups. Mary knelt next to one of T. He clearer tracks. My grandmother described them as tall as trees, strong as mountains, with voices that shake the earth. As if summoned by her words, that horrible wailing cry echoed across the mountainside again, but this time it was answered by 2 more voices from different directions. The sound reverberated off the rock faces and seemed to come from everywhere at once. They're surrounding us, Martinez said, reaching for his radio. The radio produced only static. Same with our cell phones. No signal at all, even though we'd had full bars at the trailhead. That's impossible, I said. We're not in a dead zone. I checked the coverage maps. Mary was studying the landscape with worried eyes. They control the mountain now. The mining operations broke something that kept them contained. That's when we found the first hunter. He was hanging from a pine tree 20 feet off the ground, suspended by his own climbing rope. His rifle lay broken on the ground below, snapped in half like a toy. The man was alive but unconscious, and lowering him safely took nearly an hour. When he finally came around, his first words were, "Don't let them take me back up there." What happened? I asked. What did you see? His name was Rick Morrison, and he'd been hunting these mountains for 15 years. But his hands shook as he described the encounter. We were tracking deer sign when the sound started. Not like any animal call I've ever heard. Then the trees started moving wrong, branches bending like something huge was climbing through them, but we couldn't see anything. How many were there? Ridgefield asked. At least 3, maybe more. They were communicating with those horrible screaming calls, and fast, incredibly fast. 1 second you'd see movement in the trees 50 yards away, the next second something was right behind you. Where are your hunting partners? Martinez asked. Morrison's face crumpled. They took them, just picked them up and carried them toward the peak. I only got away because I fell down a ravine and they lost my scent, the sun. The sun was starting to set and the temperature was dropping fast. We needed to get Morrison medical attention, but that meant leaving the mountain without finding the other 3 hunters. We can't just abandon them, I said. We can't help them if we're dead, Martinez replied. Mary Tenkiller had been quiet during Morrison's story, but now she spoke up. There might be a way to communicate with them. My grandfather knew the old protocols for dealing with guardian spirits. Protocols, Ridgefield asked. Offerings, acknowledgement of wrongdoing, promises to restore what was damaged. The Guardians aren't mindless killers. They're protectors. If we can prove we're trying to fix the desecration instead of causing more harm, they might let us pass safely. It sounded like desperate folklore to my scientific mind, but 3 more people were missing, and nothing else we'd tried was working. What kind of offerings? I asked. Mary reached into her bag and pulled out a bundle of sage and several small carved objects. Traditional items, but more importantly, we need to acknowledge what was done to this place and commit to making it right. As darkness fell around us, those horrible wailing cries echoed from multiple directions across the mountainside. They sounded closer now, more urgent. Whatever was up there was getting ready to hunt again, and this time, we were the prey. We made camp in a small clearing surrounded by large boulders, hoping the rock formation would provide some protection. Mary Tenkiller arranged her offerings in a careful pattern, while the rest of us set up a defensive perimeter with flare guns and emergency beacons. This feels like we're in a horror movie, Martinez said, checking his radio for the 100th time. Still no signal. Horror movies don't usually have happy endings, Ridgefield muttered, assembling his night vision camera equipment as full D. Darkness settled over the mountain. Mary began what she called a recognition ceremony. She burned sage and spoke in Cherokee, her voice carrying clearly in the still air. The words sounded ancient, formal, like a legal document being read aloud. I'm acknowledging the desecration of this sacred site, she translated quietly, asking forgiveness for the mining company's actions and promising to work for restoration of the burial grounds. For several minutes, nothing happened. Then the forest around us began to change. It started with a sound like wind through leaves, except there was no wind. The pine boughs swayed gently, and the temperature seemed to rise a few degrees. Even the oppressive silence that had haunted this place began to lighten. It's working, I whispered. That's when they showed themselves. 3 figures emerged from the tree line, moving with fluid grace despite their enormous size. In the combined light of our flashlights and Ridgefield's equipment, I got my first clear look at the Guardians. They stood nearly 8 feet tall, with proportions that suggested immense strength. Their bodies were covered in dark fur, but their faces showed distinctly human characteristics. Intelligent eyes, expressive features, hands with opposable thumbs. They moved like people, not animals, with careful, deliberate steps. The largest one, clearly the leader, approached Mary's offering circle and knelt down. When it spoke, the sound was that same musical wailing we'd heard echoing across the mountain, but quieter now, almost conversational. He says they're not angry with us, Mary translated, tears running down her cheeks. They understand we didn't cause the original damage. The Guardian gestured toward the peak, then made a series of complex hand movements that Mary followed intently. The missing hunters are alive but injured. The Guardians have been trying to protect them from the winter weather, but they don't understand human medicine. They want our help. They want us to follow them? Martinez asked nervously. Mary nodded. But we have to prove our commitment to restoration first. She pulled out a document from her folder. A legal petition to the Department of Interior requesting that Screaming Peak be designated as a protected cultural site, effectively ending any future mining or development. I need you all to sign this, she said. It's not just symbolic. This petition has real legal weight, and it shows the Guardians that we're serious about protecting their burial grounds. We all signed without hesitation. The moment the last signature was complete, the lead Guardian stood and beckoned for us to follow. The journey up the mountain was unlike anything I'd experienced in my career. The Guardians moved through the forest like they were part of it, leading us along paths I never would have found. They communicated constantly with those musical calls, coordinating our route around dangerous terrain and unstable snow. Near the peak, hidden in a cave system I hadn't known existed, we found the 3 missing hunters. They were hypothermic and suffering from exposure, but alive. The Guardians had built fires and gathered pine boughs to create insulated shelters. They've been trying to keep us warm, one of the hunters said weakly. We thought they were going to kill us, but they were actually trying to help. As we organized the rescue, providing medical aid and calling for helicopter evacuation with a satellite phone Mary had brought, the full scope of the situation became clear. The strip mining operations in the 1960s had destroyed a major Cherokee burial site, scattering the remains of hundreds of people across the mountain. The spiritual disruption had awakened the guardians, ancient protectors bound to defend sacred ground. For decades, they'd tried to keep people away from the desecrated area through intimidation and fear. But recent mining surveys for a proposed expansion had driven them to more direct action. The college skiers and hunters had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. They're not monsters, I realized. They're exactly what Mary said, guardians doing their job. The helicopter rescue took most of the night with teams evacuating the injured hunters and Rick Morrison. By dawn, we were the only humans left on the mountain. The lead guardian approached me one final time. When it spoke, Mary translated carefully. He says they trust us to keep our promise about the legal protection. But if mining equipment ever comes back to this mountain, they won't try to just scare people away anymore. The guardian gestured toward the valley below, where the lights of the mining company's survey equipment were still visible from their recent exploration work. He wants to know if we understand. I looked into those intelligent, ancient eyes and nodded. We understand. The guardian touched my shoulder gently, a gesture of respect that carried no threat at all. Then all three of them melted back into the forest, disappearing so completely it was like they'd never been there, except for the tracks in the snow and the knowledge that Screaming Peak would never be the same. 6 months later, I stood in a congressional hearing room in Washington, D.C., presenting evidence that led to the permanent protection of Screaming Peak as a National Cultural Heritage Site. The legal petition Mary Tenkiller had prepared became the foundation for legislation that not only protected the burial grounds, but also required environmental restoration of the strip-mined areas. Dr. Ridgefield sat in the gallery, still pale and jumpy around loud noises. The experience had changed him profoundly. He'd left his university position and now worked with indigenous communities, documenting traditional ecological knowledge that science had previously ignored. The Cherokee Nation's oral histories contain detailed information about guardian spirits across multiple sites in Appalachia, he told the congressional committee. We're finding that many areas with unexplained disappearances or wildlife anomalies correlate with historically desecrated burial grounds. The mining company's expansion plans were permanently canceled. More importantly, Congress allocated funds for restoration efforts, reburying scattered remains, replanting native vegetation, and removing the worst of the mining scars from the mountainside. I returned to Screaming Peak 1 year after our first encounter. The difference was remarkable. Wildlife had returned to the area, deer tracks, bird calls, the normal sounds of a healthy mountain ecosystem. The oppressive silence was gone. Mary Tenkiller met me at the trailhead, now serving as the official cultural liaison for the restoration project. She was training a new generation of Cherokee young people in the traditional knowledge needed to maintain the sacred sites. Have you seen them? I asked. Mary smiled. Not directly, but the offerings we leave are accepted, and sometimes we find their tracks near the restored burial sites. They're still there, still protecting, but at peace now. As we hiked up toward the peak, she told me about similar sites across the region where guardian spirits had been awakened by mining, logging, or development activities. Each location had its own history, its own protectors, its own requirements for appeasement and restoration. This isn't just about one mountain, she said. It's about understanding that some places are sacred, and disturbing them has consequences that science doesn't always recognize. I'd written papers about the Screaming Peak incident, carefully focusing on the successful integration of traditional ecological knowledge with modern conservation practices. I didn't mention the guardians directly. That would have destroyed my credibility in the scientific community. But my colleagues knew something significant had happened up there. Martinez had been promoted to head ranger for the cultural heritage site. Sheriff Davidson retired early, claiming he was too old for the kind of policing that involved supernatural entities. Rick Morrison and the other rescued hunters became some of the strongest advocates for protecting sacred sites across Appalachia. The most important change was in myself. I'd spent 12 years explaining away everything that didn't fit into standard biological categories. Now I understood that indigenous knowledge systems contained scientific information that Western science was only beginning to recognize. Standing at the peak where it all began, looking down at the restoration work transforming scarred mining sites back into forest, I felt something I'd never experienced before in my scientific career. Humility in the face of knowledge systems far older than my PhD. That evening, as sunset painted the mountains red and gold, I heard the Guardian's call one more time. But now it sounded different. Not a warning or a threat, but something almost like a song. The sound of ancient protectors satisfied that their sacred places were safe. I never saw them again directly. But sometimes when I'm working on restoration projects in other parts of Appalachia, I find tracks that don't match any known species. And I remember Mary Tenkiller's words about the difference between folklore and survival information. The Guardians are still out there, watching over places that science doesn't yet understand how to protect. And now I know that sometimes the best thing a scientist can do is listen to knowledge that's older than textbooks and respect mysteries that don't need to be solved, just acknowledged and protected. Screaming Peak doesn't scream anymore, but it remembers and it watches, and those of us who've encountered its guardians carry that responsibility forward into our work and our lives. Some mountains are meant to be wild, some knowledge is meant to be respected rather than dissected, and some guardians are exactly what they appear to be, protectors of things too sacred to be disturbed. Bones. Human ambition. I learned that lesson the hard way, and I'm grateful to have survived long enough to share it. My name is David Millwood, and I work as a park ranger at Cherokee National Forest in Tennessee. I've been doing this job for 8 years now, ever since my wife Sarah died in a car accident. Working with kids at summer camps helps me feel useful again, like I'm doing something good in the world. It was the third week of July when I got assigned to supervise the youth camp at Copper Creek. The place sits in a valley surrounded by old trees that have been growing there for hundreds of years. Most people think it's beautiful, but something about those woods always made me feel watched. The camp director, Linda Ashworth, met me at the main lodge when I arrived. She's been running kids programs for 20 years and knows how to handle any situation. "David, good to see you," she said, shaking my hand. "We've got 30 kids this week, ages 6 to 12. Should be a nice, quiet group." I carried my gear to the ranger station, a small log cabin at the edge of the campground. Through my window, I could see the fire pit where the kids would gather for stories, and beyond that, the old growth forest stretched up the mountain. The trees were so thick that even in daylight, you couldn't see very far into them. That first afternoon, I helped set up activities while the kids ran around exploring. They were typical summer campers, excited, loud, and full of energy. But I noticed something odd right away. Several of the younger kids kept looking toward the woods and waving. "Who are you waving at?" I asked a 6-year-old girl named Emma. "The other kids," she said, pointing into the trees. "They're playing over there." I looked where she pointed, but saw nothing except shadows between the tree trunks. "I don't see anyone, Emma. Are you sure?" She nodded seriously. "They're wearing funny old clothes, like in the pictures at my grandma's house." Linda walked over, hearing our conversation. "Kids have great imaginations," she said with a smile, but I caught a worried look in her eyes. "Emma, why don't you come help me with the craft supplies?" As the day went on, more children mentioned seeing other kids in the woods. They all described the same thing: children in old-fashioned clothes who waved and called to them from between the trees. The strange part was that different kids who hadn't talked to each other all gave the same details about what these other children looked like. That evening, after the campers were settled in their cabins, Linda and I sat by the dying fire pit. The summer air was still warm, but I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. "This has happened before," Linda said quietly. "Last summer and the year before that. Always the same story. Kids seeing other children in period clothing. The little ones are more likely to see them, but sometimes the older kids notice things too. What kind of things? I asked. Temperature drops. Sounds of children playing when all our campers are accounted for. Equipment acting up. She poked the fire with a stick, sending sparks up into the dark sky. I've worked at a lot of camps, David. This place is different. I thought about Emma's serious little face when she pointed into the woods. Kids that age don't usually make up detailed stories about clothing styles from decades past. Have you looked into the history of this area? Some. There used to be a logging camp here in the 1920s. Families lived up the mountain during cutting season, but the records are spotty. Linda stood up and stretched. I'm probably just being silly. Kids see what they want to see, right? That night, I lay awake in my bunk listening to the forest sounds, owls hooting, branches creaking in the wind, and something else. Faint laughter, like children playing in the distance. Every time I sat to listen more carefully, it stopped. The next morning, I decided to do some research. Cherokee National Forest has good records going back to the early 1900s, and I had access to historical databases through my ranger account. What I found made my skin crawl. In 1923, a diphtheria outbreak hit the Copper Creek logging camp. The disease spread fast in the cramped living conditions. 3 children from the Henshaw family died within a week of each other. Tommy, age 8, Mary, age 7, and Billy, age 5. According to the records, the logging company packed up and left immediately after, afraid the disease would spread to their other operations. The really disturbing part was what happened to the bodies. The report stated that the children were buried on site due to quarantine concerns, but there was no record of where exactly, and no marked graves had ever been found. Their parents had been working at another logging site 50 miles away and didn't even know their children had died until weeks later. I printed out the old documents and studied the photograph included in the file. 3 children in simple, old-fashioned clothes stood in front of a log cabin. The boy wore suspenders and a cap. The girl had on a long dress with buttons down the front. The smallest boy was in short pants and a white shirt. It was exactly what our campers had been describing. The second day of camp started normal enough. After breakfast, I led a nature walk with 10 kids while Linda supervised arts and crafts with the rest. We were looking for different types of leaves and talking about the trees when 8-year-old Marcus suddenly stopped walking. Mr. David, he said, tugging on my shirt, those kids are following us. I turned around but saw only the other campers in our group. Which kids, Marcus? He pointed past the other children, deeper into the woods. The ones in the funny clothes. They've been walking behind us the whole time. Several other kids turned to look where Marcus pointed. A few of them nodded and waved. Hi, Tommy, called out 7-year Tuss, old Sarah. Hi, Mary. My blood went cold. Those were the names of 2 of the Henshaw children who had died in 1923. How do you know their names? I asked Sarah. They told me yesterday, she said matter-of-factly. Tommy's the big boy with the hat. Mary has the pretty dress, and Billy is the little one who's always running around. All 3 names. All 3 children who had died of diphtheria nearly 60 years ago. I gathered the kids closer together. Let's head back to camp, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. We can finish the leaf hunt later. As we walked back, I kept looking over my shoulder. The woods seemed darker than they had a few minutes ago, and the temperature had dropped at least 10 degrees. My breath was almost visible in the suddenly cold air. Mr. David, whispered Emma, the 6-year-old from yesterday. They want us to come play with them. They say they've been waiting a long time for friends. Did they tell you that? I asked. She nodded. Tommy says they live in the old houses up the mountain. He asked if we want to see their toys. When we got back to camp, I pulled Linda aside and told her what had happened. She listened with a grim expression, then called all the counselors together for an emergency meeting. I think we need to keep the kids in groups and away from the deep woods, I said. Something's not right here. You think dead children are talking to our campers? Asked Jim, one of the junior counselors. He was barely 20 and thought he knew everything. I think we have children describing detailed interactions with people who died before their grandparents were born, I replied. Call it whatever you want, but we need to keep everyone safe. Linda agreed to my safety plan, but I could see the other counselors thought I was overreacting. That changed an hour later when we had our first real incident. During free playtime, the 12-year-old Ashley came running from the bathroom, tears streaming down her face. There are kids in there, she sobbed. But when I looked in the mirror, I couldn't see them. I could hear them talking, but the mirror was empty. Linda went to check the bathroom while I comforted Ashley. She came back shaking her head. Empty. But it's freezing cold in there, and I could swear I heard whispering. That afternoon, we kept all activities in the main camp area, but the strange occurrences continued. During lunch, several kids insisted there were extra children sitting at the tables, even though we could count every camper present. The temperature around the fire pit dropped so suddenly that we had to move the afternoon snack inside. The worst incident happened just before dinner. 9-year-old Kevin was playing catch with his friend Tyler when the ball rolled toward the woods. Kevin went to get it and suddenly screamed. I ran over to find him standing frozen, staring at a spot between two large pine trees. They want me to come with them, he whispered. They say I can stay and play forever. They're so lonely. I grabbed Kevin and pulled him back toward the camp, but the air around us had turned ice cold. My breath came out in white puffs, and frost was actually forming on the grass in the middle of July. Tommy says his parents never came back for them, Kevin said in a strange, distant voice. Mary says they're tired of waiting. Billy just cries all the time. Kevin, look at me, I said firmly. Those aren't real kids. You need to stay with us. He blinked a few times and seemed to come back to himself. But Mr. David, they look so sad. They just want friends. That evening, after we got all the kids settled in their cabins with extra counselors on watch, Linda and I sat in the ranger station going through my research. I showed her the photograph of the Henshaw children and watched her face go white. That's them, she said quietly. That's exactly what our campers have been describing. I pulled out a map of the area from the 1920s. According to the logging camp was about half a mile up the mountain from here. The families lived in cabins scattered through these woods during the cutting season. So these children died up there alone, waiting for their parents to come back, Linda asked. Looks that way. The company abandoned the site immediately after the outbreak. The parents were working at another location and didn't know what had happened until it was too late. Linda was quiet for a long moment. David, what if they really are still here? What if they've been alone in these woods for 60 years, and now they finally see other children to play with? I thought about Kevin's glazed expression when he said the ghost children wanted him to stay forever. That's what scares me. I don't think they understand that they're dead, and I don't think they understand that our kids are alive. We decided to research more about the specific location of the old logging camp. If the Henshaw children had been buried on site, their graves had to be somewhere up the mountain. Maybe if we could find them, we could figure out how to help these lost spirits find peace. But first, we had to get through the night. As I made my rounds checking on the campers, I could hear faint sounds drifting down from the woods, children's voices singing old songs, calling out to each other in games of hide and seek. The ghost children of Copper Creek were getting restless. The third day started with a crisis. When the counselors went to wake the kids for breakfast, 6-year-old Emma was missing from her bunk. Her cabin mate said she had gotten up in the middle of the night, saying she heard her friends calling her. We found her 20 minutes later, standing in a small clearing about a quarter-mile up the mountain trail. She was facing 3 empty spaces and having an animated conversation with no one we could see. "Emma?" I called, let out as I approached her carefully. The air around her was so cold my words came out in white puffs. She turned to me with a bright smile. "Hi, Mr. David. I'm playing with Tommy, Mary, and Billy. They showed me where they live." I looked around the clearing and felt my heart skip. There were the stone foundations of 3 small cabins, almost completely hidden by decades of plant growth. This had to be part of the old logging camp. "They want me to stay," Emma continued. "They say they have lots of toys and games, And they're so lonely without any friends. Emma, you need to come back to camp with me right now, I said firmly. Your parents are expecting you home in a few days. Her smile faded. But Tommy says his parents never came back. He's been waiting and waiting. Mary says maybe if I stay, they won't be sad anymore. I picked Emma up and carried her back to camp, but I could feel the temperature dropping even more as we left the clearing. By the time we reached the main area, my hands were numb with cold, despite the July heat. Linda called Emma's parents and made up a story about her sleepwalking due to excitement about camp. We couldn't tell them their daughter was being recruited by dead children. But we knew we had to get all the kids out of there soon. The problem was, the ghost children were getting more persistent. During morning activities, our campers kept wandering toward the woods, claiming their friends were calling them. We had to assign one counselor to every 3 kids just to keep them in the camp area. Around noon, things got worse. 11-year-old David was helping set up lunch when he suddenly dropped a stack of plates. They crashed to the ground, but he didn't seem to notice. "They're showing me pictures," he said in a dreamy voice. "Pictures of what happened to them." "What kind of pictures?" I asked, but I wasn't sure I wanted to know. "They got sick," David said, staring at nothing. "Really sick. Their throats hurt and they couldn't breathe. Their mama and papa were working far away. Nobody came to help them." Linda and I exchanged worried looks. David was describing symptoms of diphtheria, but there was no way a kid his age would know those details. "Billy died first," David continued, "then Mary. Tommy tried to take care of them, but he was just a little kid too. He buried them behind their cabin with his own hands before he got sick." I felt nauseous. The poor children had been completely alone when they died, trying to take care of each other with no adult help. "Tommy says he's still waiting for his parents to come back," David said. "He doesn't understand why they never came. He thinks if he has friends to play with, the waiting won't hurt so much." That afternoon, we tried to keep the kids busy with indoor activities, but the ghost children weren't giving up. The temperature in the main lodge dropped so low we could see our breath. Strange sounds echoed from the empty rooms. Children's laughter, the scraping of chairs, doors opening and closing by themselves. The living children were becoming more and more drawn to their invisible playmates. They would stop mid-sentence to listen to voices only they could hear. Several kids asked if they could go visit the other children up in the woods. The scariest moment came during afternoon snack time. 7-year-old Michael suddenly stood up from his chair and started walking toward the forest. When I called his name, he didn't respond. I caught up with him at the edge of the woods. His eyes were unfocused, and he was walking like he was in a trance. "Michael, stop!" I grabbed his shoulders and turned him around. "Where are you going?" He blinked slowly and looked up at me with confused eyes. "They need me," he said. "Tommy and Mary and Billy. They've been waiting so long. They say if I come with them, we can all play together forever, and they won't be lonely anymore." "Michael, those children died a long time ago. You can't go with them." "But they seem so real," he whispered. "And they're so sad, Mr. David. They just want friends." I walked Michael back to the lodge, but I could feel invisible eyes watching us from the woods. The ghost children were getting desperate. They had been alone for 60 years, and now that they had found living playmates, they weren't going to let them go easily. That evening, after the kids were in bed, Linda and I made a difficult decision. We would take the whole group on an adventure hike the next morning, straight to the nearest road where a bus could pick them up. We'd tell them there was a special program waiting at another location, but as I was making plans to evacuate the camp, I realized we had a bigger problem. The ghost children weren't just sad and lonely anymore. They were getting angry. Around midnight, I was woken up by screaming from one of the cabins. I ran outside to find all 30 kids standing in their pajamas in the middle of the camp area. They were all facing the woods, perfectly still, like they were waiting for something. "Kids!" I shouted. "Everyone back to your cabins right now!" None of them moved. They just stood there in the moonlight, staring at the dark forest. "They're coming," whispered Emma. "They're tired of waiting. They want us to come home with them now." The temperature plummeted. Frost began forming on the grass around the children's bare feet, and from the woods came the sound of footsteps. Small footsteps, like children walking through the underbrush. But when I looked toward the forest, I saw something that made my blood freeze. 3 pale shapes were moving between the trees, getting closer to our camp. Even in the dim moonlight, I could make out old-fashioned clothes and the outlines of young faces. For the first time since this all started, I could actually see them. Tommy, Mary, and Billy Henshaw were coming to collect their new friends. The ghost children stepped out of the woods and into the moonlight. They looked exactly like the photograph from 1923. Tommy in his suspenders and cap, Mary in her layos, long dress, Billy in his short pants and white shirt. But their faces were pale as moonlight, and their eyes held 60 years of loneliness and pain. "Come play with us," Tommy said, and his voice seemed to echo from everywhere at once. "We've been waiting so long for friends." Our 30 campers began walking toward them like they were hypnotized. Their eyes were blank and unfocused, and frost was spreading across the ground with each step they took. "No!" I shouted, running to block their path. "Kids, stop! Come back!" But they walked right through me like I wasn't there. The cold was so intense it felt like being stabbed with icicles. Linda appeared beside me trying to grab the children, but her hands passed through them too. "David, we can't touch them. The ghosts have some kind of hold on them." I watched in horror as our campers got closer to the 3 ghost children. Tommy smiled and reached out his hand toward Emma, the same 6-year-old who had wandered off to find them that morning. That's when I understood what was really happening. These weren't evil spirits trying to hurt our kids. They were children themselves, scared, lonely children who had been abandoned and forgotten for 60 years. They didn't understand death, didn't understand that our campers were alive and needed to go home to their families. "Tommy," I called out desperately. "Tommy Henshaw!" The ghost boy turned toward me, and for the first time he seemed to really see me. "You're not children," I said, walking closer despite the bone-deep cold. "You're their protector. You're the adult." Tommy's pale face crumpled with confusion. "We just want friends. We've been alone for so long." "I know," I said gently. "I know you're lonely. But these children have families waiting for them. They have parents who love them just like your parents loved you." "Our parents never came back," Mary said, and her voice was filled with decades of hurt. "They said they would come back, but they never did." I felt tears freezing on my cheeks. "They wanted to come back, Mary. They didn't know you were sick. The grown-ups at the logging camp should have told them, should have gotten you help. But they were scared, and they ran away." "We waited and waited," Billy whispered. "We got so sick, and nobody came." "You tried so hard to take care of each other," I said. "Tommy, you were so brave. You took care of your sister and brother all by yourself. But you were just a little boy. You shouldn't have had to do that alone." Tommy's ghostly form flickered like a candle flame. "I couldn't save them. I buried Mary and Billy, but then I got sick too. I thought if I waited long enough, Mama and Papa would come back." "They would have come back if they had known," I said. "They loved you so much that it broke their hearts when they found out what happened. They looked for you, but they didn't know where you were buried." The ghost children looked at each other with uncertainty. Around us, our living campers had stopped walking, but were still standing motionless in the cold. "Tommy," I continued, "these children need to go home to their parents. Their families are waiting for them, just like yours would have waited for you." "But if they leave, we'll be alone again," Mary said sadly. I thought about my own wife, Sarah, how much I missed her, how lonely I had been for the past 2 years. These children had been feeling that same emptiness for 6 decades. "You don't have to be alone," I said. "You can find your parents. They're waiting for you, too. Just not here." "Where?" Tommy asked. I wasn't sure how to explain heaven or the afterlife to ghost children, so I tried a different approach. "Do you remember feeling safe and happy? Do you remember your mama tucking you in at night or your papa telling you stories?" All 3 ghost children nodded. That feeling of being loved and safe. That's where your parents are now. They've been waiting for you there, but you've been stuck here because you were scared and confused. Tommy looked at his younger siblings, then back at me. How do we find them? You have to let go of this place, I said. You have to stop being afraid and trust that your mama and papa are waiting for you. But what if they're not? Billy whispered. What if we're alone forever? I knelt down so I was at eye level with the ghost children, even though the cold was making my whole body numb. I lost someone I loved very much. My wife Sarah died 2 years ago. For a long time I was angry and scared and lonely, just like you. I thought if I just waited in the same places we used to go together, somehow she would come back. The ghost children listened intently. But keeping myself stuck in those places didn't bring her back, I continued. It just kept me from healing and moving forward. Sarah would want me to be happy and help other people, not stay frozen in grief forever. Our mama and papa would want us to be happy too, Mary said slowly. They would, I agreed. And they would want these living children to go home safely to their own families. Tommy looked at our campers, still standing frozen in the supernatural cold. We didn't mean to hurt them. We just missed having friends so much. I know, but friends don't keep each other trapped. Friends want what's best for each other. For a long moment, the only sound was the wind in the trees. Then Tommy walked over to Emma and placed his ghostly hand on her shoulder. You have to go home now, he said gently. Your mama and papa are waiting for you. Emma blinked and looked around in confusion. Tommy? Where am I? You're going back to camp, Tommy said. Back to your real friends. One by one, the ghost children touched each of our campers, releasing them from whatever spell had held them. The living kids slowly came back to awareness, shivering and confused, but unhurt. Mary and Billy joined their brother, and the 3 ghost children stood together in the moonlight. Are you ready? Tommy asked his siblings. Mary nodded. I want to see Mama and Papa. Me too, Billy whispered. They turned to me one last time. Thank you, Tommy said, for helping us understand. Thank you for letting our friends go home, I replied. The ghost children smiled, the first truly happy expression I had seen on their faces. Then they began to fade, becoming more and more transparent until they were just whispers of light in the darkness. We can see them, Mary's voice echoed faintly. We can see Mom and Papa. They're here. And then they were gone. The supernatural cold lifted immediately. Our campers were tired and confused, but unharmed. We got them back to their cabins and spent the rest of the night making sure everyone was okay. The next morning, we packed up the camp and took all the kids home early. We told their parents there had been a minor emergency with the water system, nothing serious but enough to cut the session short. Most of the children remembered very little about their encounters with the ghost children, like waking up from a strange dream. But Emma remembered. As I helped her into her parents' car, she tugged on my shirt. Mr. David, she whispered, Tommy wanted me to tell you something. He said to look behind the big cabin with the broken chimney. He said you'd understand. After all the families left, Linda and I hiked up to the old logging campsite. Behind the largest foundation, where a chimney made of stacked stones still stood, we found them. 3 small graves marked with rough wooden crosses that had somehow survived 60 years of weather. The names were barely readable, carved by a child's uncertain hand. Tommy Henshaw, Mary Henshaw, Billy Henshaw. Tommy had buried his brother and sister himself, then died alone, waiting for parents who never knew their children needed them. Linda and I contacted the Cherokee National Forest Administration and the local historical society. Within a month, the Henshaw children had proper headstones with their names, birth dates, and death dates clearly marked. We also arranged for a memorial plaque explaining the history of the logging camp and the families who had lived there. The most important thing we did was track down any living relatives. It took some research, but we found that Tommy and Mary and Billy had cousins still living in Tennessee. The family had always wondered what had happened to the 3 children who had simply vanished from family records in 1923. At the memorial service we organized, I met Ellen Henshaw Martinez, who was the great niece of the three ghost children. She was in her 70s and had grown up hearing family stories about the missing children. My grandmother never stopped looking for them, Ellen told me as we stood beside their new headstones. She always said she felt like they were lost somewhere, waiting to be found. I think she would be so relieved to know they're finally at peace. I went back to Cherokee National Forest and requested a permanent transfer to a different district. Not because I was afraid of Copper Creek, but because I knew the children were at rest now and no longer needed my help. Other places, other people might need what I had learned about helping lost souls find their way home. But I didn't leave before I did one more thing. I wrote a detailed report about what had happened and filed it in the Cherokee National Forest historical records. Not the official version we had given the camp families, but the true story of Tommy, Mary, and Billy Henshaw, and how they had finally found their way to their parents after 60 years of waiting. Someone needed to remember their story. Someone needed to make sure they weren't forgotten again. I still work as a park ranger, but now I pay closer attention to the histories of the places I protect. I've learned that sometimes the land holds memories, especially when tragedy has occurred and people have been lost or abandoned. I also learned something about grief and letting go, just like the Henshaw children were. Stuck in their loneliness, I had been stuck in mine after Sarah died. Helping them find peace helped me start healing too. I still miss Sarah every day, but I'm not waiting in empty places anymore, hoping she'll come back. I'm living my life in a way that would make her proud. Sometimes late at night when I'm doing my rounds in whatever forest I'm assigned to protect, I think I hear children laughing in the distance. But it's not the desperate, lonely laughter I heard at Copper Creek. It's the sound of children who are safe and loved and finally free to play. And that sound doesn't scare me anymore. It gives me hope. Last month I got a letter from Linda. She's still running youth camps, though not at Copper Creek anymore. The letter included a newspaper clipping about the memorial service for the Henshaw children and a photo of their beautiful new headstones surrounded by flowers that family members still bring. At the bottom of the letter, Linda had written, "The woods at Copper Creek are quiet now, peaceful. I think they're finally resting." I keep that letter in my ranger station desk, next to a photo of Sarah and the old picture of Tommy, Mary, and Billy Henshaw from 1923. It reminds me that sometimes the most important part of protecting a place is understanding its history and making sure the people who lived there and died there are remembered with dignity and love. The children of Copper Creek are home now, and so am I. My name is Marcus Ironside, and I've been a park ranger in the George Washington National Forest for 19 years. In all that time, I thought I'd seen everything these mountains could throw at me. Lost hikers, bear attacks, flash floods, even the occasional crazy person running around naked thinking they're one with nature. But I was wrong. Dead wrong. It started on a Tuesday morning in late October. The leaves were that perfect mix of gold and red that brings tourists up from the city, cameras ready. I was finishing my coffee at the Massanutten Ranger Station when dispatch crackled to life. "Ranger Ironside, we've got a missing family report. The Morrisons should have checked in yesterday at the Woodstock Tower." I knew the Morrisons. David and Linda, with their two kids, Sarah and Mike. Good people. They'd been volunteering with us all summer, helping fix trail markers and cleaning up campsites. David taught his kids to respect the forest, pack out their trash, stay on marked trails. Not the type to just disappear. Copy that. Last known location? Headed toward Devil's Backbone Trail, planning a 3-day hike through the Limestone Caves area. My stomach tightened a little. The Limestone Caves. In 19 years, we'd pulled more bodies out of those caves than anywhere else in my section. The rock formations made it easy to get lost, and the underground streams could rise fast after a rain. Plus, something about that area always felt off. Animals avoided it. Even in hunting season, you'd never see deer tracks within 2 miles of those caves. I grabbed my pack and headed out. The morning was crisp, maybe 40 degrees, with that thin mountain air that makes your lungs work harder. Perfect hiking weather, which made the Morrisons' disappearance even stranger. They were experienced. They wouldn't have gotten lost in good conditions like this. The Trailhead Park. Ing area showed their blue Honda Civic, license plate matching the report. A light layer of dew covered the windshield, which meant it had been sitting there all night. I checked inside. Nothing missing, no signs of trouble. Their cooler was still in the back seat. Lunch packed for today. I started up Devil's Backbone Trail, following the blazes. The path winds through thick oak and maple forest for about 3 miles before reaching the limestone formations. Usually, it's alive with bird calls and squirrel chatter. Today, it was quiet. Too quiet. About a mile in, I found their first campsite. The fire ring was cold, maybe 8 hours dead. But something was wrong with the setup. The tent was perfectly pitched, stakes driven deep, guy lines tight. Everything neat and organized, just like David always kept it. But the sleeping bags were laid out on top of the tent, not inside it. And there were 4 bowls sitting in a perfect square around the dead fire, each one filled with what looked like acorns and small stones. I'd never seen anything like it. In all my years in these mountains, I'd never seen campers arrange anything like that. It looked almost ceremonial. I keyed my radio. Dispatch, this is Ironside. Found the Morrison campsite, mile marker 3 on Devil's Backbone. Site appears abandoned, but there are some unusual arrangements here, requesting backup for extended search. Static. Then more static. Dispatch, do you copy? Nothing. I checked my radio. Full battery, antenna extended. Sometimes the mountains blocked signals, but not usually this close to the main trail. That's when I heard it. Faint, but clear. A child's voice, calling from somewhere ahead on the trail. Help! Someone help us! It sounded like Sarah Morrison. I ran toward the voice, crashing through underbrush, following the sound deeper into the forest. My boots slipped on wet leaves as the trail curved toward the limestone caves. The voice kept calling, always just ahead, always just out of sight. Sarah! It's Ranger Ironside! Where are you? Here, we're here! Daddy's hurt! The voice was coming from a narrow gap between 2 rock formations, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. I'd patrolled this area dozens of times, but I'd never noticed this passage before. Strange. The limestone here was old, carved by thousands of years of water flow, but this gap looked almost fresh. I pulled out my flashlight and squeezed through the opening. The passage led to a small chamber, maybe 15 feet across, with 3 tunnels branching off into darkness. The air smelled wrong. Not the usual cave dampness, but something sweet and rotten, like fruit left too long in the sun. Sarah? Mike? Can you hear me? My voice echoed strangely in the chamber, bouncing back with a hollow sound I'd never heard before. And then I saw them. 4 backpacks, arranged in a neat row against the far wall. The Morrison family packs, each one sitting upright, straps folded perfectly, as if someone had placed them there with great care. But the family was nowhere to be seen. I approached the packs slowly, hand on my radio even though I knew it wasn't working. David's pack was open, contents spread out on the cave floor, but not scattered like someone had searched through it in a hurry. Organized. Food in one pile, clothes in another, camping gear in a third. Like someone had been taking inventory. That's when I found the photos. They were Polaroids, which was odd because I'd never seen the Morrisons with an old-style camera. The first photo showed the family setting up camp at the site I'd found earlier. Normal enough. The second showed them sitting around their campfire, smiling. Still normal. The third photo made my hands shake. It showed the family walking single file down a trail I didn't recognize, but they weren't alone. Behind them, barely visible in the shadows between the trees, was a tall figure. Too tall, maybe 7 feet, with arms that hang down past where its knees should be. The photo was blurry, but I could make out enough to see that the figure's face was wrong somehow. Too long or too wide, or maybe just too empty. Help! Please, help us! The voice again, but this time it was coming from one of the deeper tunnels. Mike's voice now, not Sarah's, scared and desperate. I grabbed my heavy-duty flashlight and moved toward the sound, leaving the packs behind. The tunnel sloped downward, walls closing in until I had to duck my head. The sweet rotten smell got stronger. And then I started seeing the bones. Small ones at first, mixed in with the rocks. Bird bones, maybe rabbit. But as I went deeper, they got bigger, much bigger. I found what looked like a human skull, cracked open like an egg, sitting in a small alcove carved into the tunnel wall. Inside the skull, more of those acorns and stones. "Mike? Where are you, son?" "Here. Down here. The thing. It took Mom and Dad." I followed the voice, beam of my flashlight dancing across limestone walls that seemed to move in the shadows. The tunnel opened into another chamber, this one larger, with a high ceiling that disappeared into darkness above. And there, in the center of the chamber, was something that made me understand why the animals avoided this place. It was a tree. But trees don't grow in limestone caves, 50 feet underground. This one was huge, maybe 4 feet across at the base, with bark that looked more like dark metal than wood. Its branches reached up into the darkness, and from those branches hung things that swayed slightly in the still cave air. Clothes, dozens of pieces of clothing suspended from the branches like Christmas ornaments. I could see a park ranger uniform that looked like it had been there for years, hiking boots, still tied, a small pink backpack that might have belonged to a child, and there, hanging from a low brand, which, just within reach, was William Ashford's ranger badge, the same badge he was wearing on his uniform right now, back at the station. "That's not possible," I whispered. My flashlight beam swept across the chamber, and I saw more things hanging from the tree. Not just clothes now, but other objects, wallets, watches, cell phones, cameras, a child's stuffed bear, its fur matted and dark. And at the base of the tree, arranged in careful piles, were more bones. Human bones this time, I was sure of it, sorted by size, cleaned perfectly white, stacked like cordwood. "Help us, please!" The voice was coming from above now, from up in the branches of the impossible tree. But as I raised my flashlight toward the sound, the voice changed, deepened, became something that might have been human once, but wasn't anymore. "Help us," it said again, but now I could hear the echo, the hollow sound that made my teeth ache. "Come join us." I ran. I crashed through the tunnel, flashlight beam swinging wildly as I fought my way back toward the main chamber. Behind me, I could hear something moving. Not footsteps exactly, but a sliding, scraping sound like something heavy being dragged across stone. The sweet rotten smell got stronger, following me through the narrow passage. By the time I squeezed back through the rock opening and into daylight, my heart was hammering so hard I thought it might burst. I didn't stop running until I reached the Morrison campsite. My radio crackled to life as soon as I cleared the limestone area. "Ironside, this is dispatch. You missed your check-in. What's your status?" I found their gear in a cave, but no sign of the family, requesting full search and rescue team, and I stopped. How could I explain what I'd seen? The impossible tree, the bones, the clothes hanging like trophies. Requesting what? Just send the team, and tell them to bring extra lights, lots of them. The search team arrived 2 hours later. Bill Ashford led it, looking exactly like he always did, complete with his ranger badge pinned to his uniform shirt. The SA, me badge I'd seen hanging from that underground tree. I couldn't stop staring at it. "Marcus, you look like you've seen a ghost," Bill said, checking his equipment. "What did you find down there?" I told him about the abandoned campsite, the organized backpacks, the cave system. I didn't mention the tree or the bones or the photos, not yet. I needed to see if anyone else would see what I'd seen. We went in as a team of 6, me, Bill, 2 other rangers I'd known for years, and 2 sheriff's deputies. All experienced cave searchers, all carrying professional rescue gear. If the Morrisons were down there, we'd find them. But when we reached the rock gap, it was gone. "I don't understand," I said, running my hands along the limestone wall. "There was an opening right here, wide enough for a person." The rock face was smooth, unmarked. No gap, no passage, no sign that one had ever existed. The other rangers spread out, searching the area, but found nothing. According to them, I was looking at a solid wall of limestone that had been that way for thousands of years. Maybe you were confused, Bill suggested gently. These rock formations all look alike after a while. Easy to mix up locations. But I knew what I'd seen. I led them to 3 other spots along the limestone face, each one I was sure had been the entrance to that chamber. All solid rock, all impossible. Marcus, when's the last time you took some leave? One of the deputies asked. You've been working overtime for months. Maybe you need a break. That's when we heard the screaming. It came from somewhere deep in the forest, echoing off the rock faces, so we couldn't tell which direction it was coming from. A woman's voice, high and desperate, calling for help. It sounded like Linda Morrison. We spread out in search formation and moved toward the sound. The screaming continued, always seeming to come from just ahead of us, just out of sight. We followed it deeper into the forest, farther from the marked trails, into areas where the trees grew thick and the underbrush caught at our clothes. That's when Bill disappeared. 1 minute he was right behind me, calling out directions to the other searchers. The next minute, silence. I turned around and he was gone. No footsteps, no crashed branches, no sound at all. Bill? Bill, where are you? The other rangers stopped, looked around. We were in a small clearing surrounded by oak trees with good visibility in all directions. There was nowhere for a person to hide. Nowhere Bill could have gone without us seeing him. He was right here, one of the deputies said. I was watching him. We searched the clearing, calling Bill's name. Our voices echoed strangely in the still air, bouncing back with that same hollow sound I'd heard in the cave. And then, from somewhere above us, we heard Bill's voice. Down here! I'm down here! I found them! We looked up. The voice was coming from the canopy, 40 feet above the forest floor. But there was nothing there. No treehouse, no platform, no way for a person to be up there. Bill, how did you get up there? I called. I didn't go up, his voice answered. I went down. I'm in a cave. The Morrisons are here, but God, they're not right. Something's wrong with them. They won't stop smiling. The 2 deputies looked at each other. One of them keyed his radio, probably calling for more backup. The other started setting up climbing gear, preparing to go up into the trees after a voice that couldn't possibly be coming from where it sounded like it was coming from. That's when I saw the tracks. They were pressed into the soft earth at the edge of the clearing, barely visible under a pile of dead leaves. But once I brushed the leaves away, they were clear enough. Footprints, but wrong. Too long, too narrow, with what looked like claw marks at the toe end. And they were huge, at least size 16, maybe bigger. I followed the tracks across the clearing. They led to the base of a large oak tree, then just stopped, as if whatever made them had walked to the tree and then vanished. Marcus. One of the other rangers was standing next to me, pointing up into the branches. Look. Hanging from a branch about 20 feet up was Bill's equipment belt. Radio, flashlight, first aid kit, all of it still attached, swaying gently in the breeze that had just started blowing through the forest. Below it, carved into the bark of the tree, were symbols I didn't recognize. They looked old, older than anything I'd ever seen in these mountains. But somehow, looking at them made my skin crawl, like my body recognized them even if my mind didn't. Bill! I shouted. Bill, can you hear me? His voice answered from a completely different direction now, somewhere back toward the limestone caves. Fainter, but still clear. Don't come looking for me, Marcus. It knows you're here now. It's been waiting for you. Your grandfather made it angry. My grandfather. Joseph Ironside, who died when I was 12. Half Cherokee, full of old stories I'd never paid much attention to. Stories about things that lived in the deep places of the mountains. Things that had to be kept sleeping with the right words and the right ceremonies. Stories I'd always thought were just superstition. I sent the other searchers back to get more help, told them I'd wait at the site for the rescue helicopters. But as soon as they were out of sight, I headed back toward the limestone caves. Alone. I knew it was stupid. I knew it went against every rule of search and rescue work, but Bill's words kept echoing in my head. Your grandfather made it angry. There was something here, something connected to my family, and I was the only one who might understand what it was. The sun was getting low by the time I reached the rock formations again. In the slanted orange light, the limestone looked different, older somehow, and marked with shadows that seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at them. I found my grandfather's journal in my truck. I'd been carrying it around for years, never really reading it, just keeping it because it was the only thing of his I had left. But now I opened it, looking for anything about this place, about things that lived in caves and stole people. Most of it was in Cherokee, which I couldn't read. But there were English entries, too, dated from the 1920s, when my grandfather was a young man working as a guide for government surveyors, mapping the forest. The Hollow Walker woke up again, found 3 surveyors gone from camp, just their clothes left behind, folded neat like someone was doing laundry. Tommy Crow says we need to do the old ceremony, the one his grandfather taught him. Says if we don't put it back to sleep, it'll keep taking people until the whole mountain is empty. Ceremony worked, but barely. The thing fought us hard this time, harder than the stories said it would. Tommy thinks it's getting stronger. Been feeding for too long, maybe 60 years since the last proper sealing. We use the old words, the old offerings, but I don't think it's really sleeping. Just waiting. Found the cave where it keeps the bones. Couldn't go in, but could see the tree from the entrance. God help me, the tree is growing. Getting bigger every year, every person it takes. Tommy says when the tree reaches the surface, the Hollow Walker won't need to hide anymore. It'll be able to walk in the daylight, take anyone it wants. There were drawings, too, sketched in faded pencil. The tree I'd seen underground, but smaller. Symbols that matched the ones carved into the oak tree where Bill had vanished. And diagrams of what looked like a ritual circle with specific stones and plants arranged in a pattern. The journal's last entry was dated just a month before my grandfather died. Marcus is 12 now, old enough to learn, but his father won't let me teach him the old ways. Says it's all superstition, so the boy needs to live in the modern world. Maybe he's right. Maybe the Hollow Walker will stay sleeping forever. But if it wakes up again, if it starts taking people, someone needs to know what to do. Someone needs to remember. A sound made me look up from the journal. Something was moving in the rocks above me, sliding between the limestone formations with that same scraping noise I'd heard in the cave. The sun was almost down now, and the shadows were getting thick and dark. Marcus Ironside. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, echoing off the rock walls around me. It sounded like Bill, but underneath it was something else. Something hollow and hungry. Your grandfather hurt me, bound me, kept me sleeping for so long. But I'm awake now, and I'm so very hungry. I ran toward my truck, but the keys weren't where I'd left them. They were sitting on the hood, arranged in a neat line like everything else the thing had touched. As I grabbed them, I heard footsteps behind me. Slow, deliberate, each step making a wet slapping sound on the ground. I turned around and saw it. The Hollow Walker looked almost human from a distance. It walked on 2 legs, had arms, and a head in roughly the right places. But up close, everything was wrong. It was too tall, maybe 8 feet, with skin that looked like bark and arms that hung down to its knees. Its face was the worst part. Like someone had taken a human face and stretched it, pulled it longer and wider until it barely looked like a face at all, and its eyes were just holes, dark empty spaces that seemed to go on forever. I have been collecting, it said in that voice that echoed from inside its chest. Collecting and growing. Your friends are part of my tree now. Their voices are my voices. Their memories are my memories. It smiled, and I could see that its teeth were made of bone. Human bone, yellowed and sharp. But you, it continued, you are special. Your grandfather's blood. Cherokee blood that knows the old ways. When I take you, I will know them too. I will know how to break the other. Seals, wake the other sleepers. This whole mountain range will be mine to hunt. I opened the journal to the ritual diagrams, trying to understand what my grandfather had done, how he'd put this thing to sleep before. The symbols, the arrangement of stones, the words in Cherokee that I couldn't read but somehow, looking at them, felt in my bones. The hollow walker moved closer, its impossible face tilting to one side as it studied me. "You cannot read the old words," it said. "You do not know the ceremonies. Your grandfather failed to pass them on. You are just a man with a book you cannot understand." But as it spoke, I felt something changing in the air around us. The wind picked up, carrying with it the smell of cedar smoke and old forest, smells that reminded me of my grandfather's house when I was small. And with the wind came a voice, faint but clear. My grandfather's voice, speaking Cherokee words that I couldn't understand, but somehow knew the meaning of. Words of binding, words of sealing, words that made the hollow walker stop moving and let out a shriek that sounded like wind through broken glass. "Not possible," it hissed. "You do not know." But I did know somehow. The words were coming from my mouth now. Cherokee syllables that I'd never learned but inherited, passed down through blood and bone from a grandfather who'd died trying to protect me from this exact moment. The hollow walker fought against the words, lunging toward me with claws that could have torn me apart. But the wind was getting stronger now, and with it came the smell of sage and sweetgrass, tobacco and cedar. The smells of the old ceremonies, the old protections. Light began to flow from the journal in my hands. Not electric light, but something warmer, older. The kind of light that might have come from fires lit by people who understood these mountains long before park rangers and hikers. Trails and GPS coordinates. The hollow walker screamed, a sound that made the limestone rocks crack and sent every animal within miles running for cover. But it was losing, I could tell. The Cherokee words were binding it, pulling it back toward whatever dark place it had come from. "This is not finished," it said as the light grew brighter. "I have fed too well, grown too strong. The seals are weakening everywhere. Others will wake. Others will hunt." The light flashed once, brilliant and warm, and the hollow walker was gone. I found Bill 3 days later, sitting in one of the deeper cave systems 2 miles from where he'd disappeared. He was alive but changed, staring at nothing with eyes that had seen too much. The rescue team said he'd probably been in shock, wandering in the caves for days. He couldn't remember anything about what had happened. The Morrison family was never found. Their car was eventually towed from the trailhead, their missing persons case filed away with dozens of others from these mountains over the years. Officially, they're still listed as lost hikers who probably fell into an underground river system and were carried away. But I know better. I've seen their clothes hanging from that impossible tree, growing deep under the mountain where no tree should be able to grow. I've heard their voices calling from the darkness, part of something hungry and patient and old. Bill transferred to desk duty after his recovery, never went back into the field, never talked about what happened in those 3 days. Sometimes I catch him staring at the limestone caves on the station's topographic maps, tracing the passages with his finger like he's trying to remember something important. I still patrol the area. Someone has to. The Cherokee words my grandfather left me work, but they're not permanent. Every few months I go back to the limestone formations of Pund and repeat the ceremony, reinforce the seals that keep the hollow walker sleeping. I've learned to read my grandfather's journal, found Cherokee elders who remember some of the old ways and are willing to teach them to someone who needs to know. The mountains are quiet now, mostly, but sometimes, on nights when the moon is dark and the wind blows just right through the limestone caves, I hear voices calling from deep underground. Voices of people who went missing years ago, decades ago, maybe even centuries ago, all of them part of something that's still growing, still waiting for its chance to wake up and hunt again. I carry sage now, and tobacco, and small stones painted with the old symbols. Rangers aren't supposed to believe in things like that, but rangers also aren't supposed to encounter things that steal people and hang their clothes from underground trees like trophies. My grandfather's journal has entries about other places, other seals, other things sleeping in the deep parts of the mountains, things that his grandfather had bound, and his grandfather's grandfather before that. An unbroken line of people who knew the old ways and used them to keep the world safe from things it wasn't ready to understand. Now that line includes me. Last week I got a call from a ranger in the Great Smoky Mountains. 3 hikers missing near Cades Cove, their campsite found empty but organized in ways that didn't make sense. Bowls arranged around a dead fire filled with acorns and stones. The ranger's voice was shaky as he described what he'd found. "I know this sounds crazy," he said, "but I think there's something down there, something that doesn't want to be found." I told him I'd be right there, because someone needs to remember. Someone needs to know what to do when the old things wake up hungry. And sometimes, late at night when I'm alone in the ranger station, I can hear my grandfather's voice in the wind outside, speaking Cherokee words that sound like warnings, reminding me that the seals don't last forever, that the mountains hold things older and hungrier than most people can imagine, but also reminding me that someone still knows how to send them back to sleep, at least for now.